Welcome to RSA Conference. We're here recording live from Broadcast Alley in Moscone West. This interview is sponsored by GitLab. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and joining me today for this interview is Josh Lemos, Chief Information Security Officer at GitLab. Hello, Josh.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad you're here, and I wanted to talk about one of the most boring things ever. Sorry. Maybe we can make it sexy.
Yeah.
Supply chain.
Yeah.
But maybe we can throw some AI enabled in there. I don't think you're the type of person to go buzzword, but we're going to have to mention AI.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So there's a lot of basics of the CICD pipeline: write code, build code, deploy it, etc. Why are we still worried about the securing the CICD? You know, I think these conversations have been going on for 20 years at least, right?
It's a long-running conversation, and I think that there is a multitude of factors that lead us here. When I talk to customers, everyone is on a different maturity curve in terms of where they are with their source code management, their CI pipelines, their dependency management, whether they have an office of open source, any number of things. But one of the factors, interestingly enough, is how many build pipelines they have. And in most cases, they have some number of build pipelines, all with different levels of security assurance. Some are closely managed, others not so much, and they generally lack governance across all of those different pipelines. And so one of the, I think, goals and metrics that a lot of companies should have when it comes to supply chain security is, can we consolidate down to a number of systems through which we have visibility so that we can get to some amount of software governance?
Gotcha. Something that our human brains can reason with, perhaps.
Exactly.
Yeah, so because I'm a fan of, there's a huge push the last couple of years, memory safety, Rust, Go, et cetera. What's kind of that equivalent for the CI/CD pipeline? You're kind of hinting at that, of condensing into something that we can reason through, or has more governance. Is there a better future? Can we be optimistic about the supply chain?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of principles that apply to supply chain security and CI pipelines in that regard. The first one is really minimalism. Like, how can we shrink down what we're doing so we're protecting less surface area? And that can be in your base container images. That can be in your dependencies, right? Like, how many times do you go into a project and you see like a massive list of imports, right? You're like, are these even used, right? Because it's creating a lot of churn and a lot of operational overhead on all those teams that are patching things, and they might be patching those CVEs for absolutely no reason. So it's just an ineffective use of our security resources, our engineering resources, and energy there. So if we can minimize that to something reasonable, and I do think this is an area where AI can actually help us as well in a very boring use case, is looking at dependency reduction, right? Like, can we reduce to sort of a min set of known dependencies in our projects that we should patch and manage effectively?
Yeah, and I think, I don't think it's a bad thing at all for security to be boring, right?
Not at all.
So, we don't want to be tedious. I think that's what you were hinting at. Like, everything you were describing was, why are developers spending more time on other people's code, fixing this dependency, this known CVE? And you alluded to AI. I would love to have that conversation about AI, how AI, how it can be helping the developers rather than the sky is falling perspective of that.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about, is this AI is just like the developer you can run 24/7? Are they on their own? What's their role? How are they helping?
I think my current view of the problem space is something where it is developer plus AI together in the equation, where you can essentially have like a AI AppSec consultant sitting by you all day to do some of the more boring work. And maybe that is even changing the way that you start writing a new project or new code. So, test-driven development is something that people always aspire to do, but maybe with the creation of all of these new chat assistants for code development, code generation, and generative AI, that may lead us to a point where you can start with writing test cases through an AI agent, And those test cases can then drive your code generation subsequently. It can also do things like explain vulnerabilities. So you're in your pipeline, you run a static code analysis, or you have software composition analysis tools running, and it spits out an output to the developer, and they're like, I don't know what this means, right? AI not only could do something boring, like say, we found 10,000 issues, but if you just go to like this version of this Java library, it fixes 9,000 of them.
Do this one simple trick, right?
Yeah. That's a massive time savings, right?
And so part of, I very much appreciate this approach, because you're CISO, you're describing this embrace of AI, embrace of using AI for coding, obviously from a security perspective with your security hat on. So it sounds to me that test-driven development you can have more confidence in it. Does having that angle to say, let's test, let's use AI for the quality, is that a deliberate choice, or is it more of just how developers might embrace it?
I think my view on how we can get to a better set of outcomes is largely informed by how we can set up the right environments and right constructs for success. And if we know what we're testing for, we know the problems that we're trying to solve for.
Okay.
And it really gets back to like basic engineering fundamentals and doing the right things. And if we can accelerate doing the right things, it's not like people don't want to do these things. They absolutely do, but they're generally time constrained. They have to ship features. So if we can accelerate the velocity and sort of the tedium through AI as an assistant, that can get us to a better set of outcomes. I also am a believer that if you just ask AI to generate a bunch of code, it's not going to generate the most secure code. And we've seen that in a couple of research studies that have come out over the past couple of years, right? Which is like, if you give it to a CS student, they're going to generate a bunch of insecure code. If you give it to a senior developer, they're probably going to write great code, and they're going to get the velocity benefit more so than a junior developer. So there's promise of like, we'll have many fewer developers. I think that is untrue. But what I think is our developers who are more seasoned will get better and will get faster.
So very, very much assistive rather than a replacement is how you're describing that. Yeah. Then, so we've got AIs can generate as assistants, as you're saying, with the code, and we did start talking about supply chain, very, very exciting topics here. Will AI help with just explaining not what the vulns are, but with what's in a package? Is that a use case that's reasonable, or do we have better ways of saying, this is what we can trust the provenance and how we built and created this software artifact?
Yeah, I think AI provenance is kind of a juicy topic, or software provenance is kind of a juicy topic. There is some benefit to understanding where things come from and creating some rules around it, and AI may be able to help us there. I'm not entirely sure that we'll ever get around the problem of the fact that there are tens of thousands of node packages created every single day, and that we'll get in front of that provenance just on a sheer numbers game. But there are other benefits to supply chain security that, again, going back to some of the more boring things. Can we get to a point where we can have amazing integration test coverage, amazing unit test coverage, and have those generated for us automatically? And then get to the point where if we need to upgrade a dependency, that can be upgraded. It can go through the cycle of testing, integration tests, and know with some degree of confidence that that's not going to break your build. And have that entire loop happen faster. I think chasing vulnerabilities is a fool's errand ultimately. But if we can get to the principles of minimalism, if we can get to patching really what matters to our environment, ultimately there's some benefits for security from AI and code generation and generative AI ultimately that we can all benefit from as an industry.
Well, that's interesting. I'm curious then if we save developer time, don't play Pokemon and collect all the CVEs and have to fix them. The AppSec team doesn't have to look at every single dependency. We could go through that list of tedium could be pretty easy to go through. Yeah. But if we got rid of that, what would you rather either the developers or that security team be focusing on instead? What are the richer stuff that you think both appeal to humans that aren't boring, that would also have that really good impact on security?
Oh boy, you want to talk about secure by design? Is that where we're going here? Yeah, it's the other part of, we get the most benefit and the highest leverage out of our security teams by looking at threat modeling and how we design systems, but also how we build systems to abstract away human intervention, like zero-touch infrastructure deployments. So if we can get to modeling out all of our different deployment models and taking developers out of writing Terraform or Cloud Foundation code, right, to be able to push out infrastructure, we can then know that like if they're using these deployment mechanisms, we don't have to really spend their time on that. We could spend our time on, are we designing the right data structures? Are we thinking about how we are managing our data responsibly, how we're integrating with other points, right? It's not just open source. I think that the conversation around supply chain gets distilled down to OSS often. It's like, think about all the commercial integrations we have as well. Like those present equal risk. We just don't hear about them as often.
Yeah, and especially too, because you're just all these credentials to talk to this API, this other API. That protecting credentials is one of the hardest parts. That's how we've seen all types of breaches occur, right?
Yeah. I think the API key token leaks, identity breaches are the sort of bane of our existence presently.
Yes.
And until we get a better handle on that, I think those still present the largest supply chain risk, much more so than the XZ utils example or some of the others.
Sure, yeah. So, which is exciting, but I think to the theme is like the boring stuff, doing authentication right, doing identity right, you kind of need to have that in place, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I think that as much as people don't want to spend the time to think about how to do least privilege or manage their identity or get their AWS IAM permissions correct, like those are the essential foundations to sort of mitigating risk and having runbooks to deal with those things when they inevitably go wrong at some point, right?
So part of what you were talking a little bit earlier too about the infrastructure, immutable infrastructure, Terraform, I'll throw out the infrastructure as code as the example. And I don't know if I have a good grasp of this yet or if this is a good question. Help me out here. Do we have a CICD as code? Is that kind of the future that as you're talking about like the governance, consolidating, minimalizing, is that the helpful direction or is there something different we should be thinking about for the supply chain?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of what we do is define our pipelines as code, right?
Sure.
So we define each stage as code, and in those stages we say these are the different scans that will run. These are what we're looking for as test coverage in each stage of the build pipeline. So we are defining what must happen from a governance perspective at each stage in the CI pipeline. And so I think that ultimately is a way to get good visibility, number one.
Okay.
Tighter feedback loops to the developer, number two. And then necessary governance over the whole thing. And then throughout that, you can check for, other basic things like branch protection, right? Like no one wants to sit around and talk about branch protection. But like
look at the time.
and dual control and make sure that all of that happens. But there are simple things like emergency changes have to happen. And we're not always going to get another developer up at 2 a.m. to approve a change. But what we want to do is launch essentially an audit event that says, fire this off to the compliance team, make sure that this is followed up with a ticket so that the entire workflow is captured when we have to prove this event out for an audit of some sort. And if that can all be automated, again, massive savings for the security team, for the engineering team.
Yes.
Everyone goes home happy.
We're going to go home happy after this conversation. This is a good one, Josh. I want to thank you for your time.
Thanks, Mike.
Yes, you helped us very much turn a non-boring topic into something that's actually a bit more compelling and shows some promise even for AI. So definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
I want to thank everybody for listening. If you want to learn more about GitLab, go to securityweekly.com/GitLab RSAC. And stick around. We have a lot more interviews coming up after this break.